Hey there. So you probably know of that famous painting we've been looking at. That's The Prayer at Valley Forge by Arnold Freiberg. It depicts George Washington alone on his knees praying in the woods with his horse Nelson at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, where the Continental Army encamped during that terrible winter of 1977-1978. But do you know anything about Valley Forge knives? Well, me neither until recently. So here we go. Quick little history lesson. Valley Forge Knives was established in 1892 by a German immigrant by the name of Edward Grafmuller. He had a goal. He wanted to produce knives in the U.S. that had a quality on par with the knives being made in his homeland. He started shop in Newark, New Jersey, and quickly built a nice little knife business. 7 or 8 years later, in 1899, it was merged with Herman Boker and Company. And so that's my interest in this. Boker USA had been established all the way back in 1837, but primarily just to import knives from Heinrich Boker of Solingen, Germany. And then they started putting all these tariffs in place here in the U.S., and it made it increasingly hard to sell imported knives, at a price where you were competitive. So Boker and Company decided they needed to make knives in the U.S., and therefore they bought Valley Forge, and by 1902 they had controlling interest in the company. It's interesting to know that both companies went bankrupt in 1914 at the beginning of World War I, but they both emerged from bankruptcy together the very next year. Then in 1916, Valley Forge's offices were moved to Boker's address in New York City, and the Valley Forge trademark was adopted. It's the VF inside a circle. And Boker USA would continue to use that stamp or that trademark all the way until 1950, alongside with their own stamps. Now here's a fun little fact. Also in 1916, Boker purchased Cyclops Steel of Titusville, Pennsylvania, in whose factory today's GEC knives are made. I bet you didn't know that. Here's a look at a catalog cut from 1920 of Valley Forge Cutlery. There you can see at the top Valley Forge Cutlery Company, but right underneath that you'll see it says Boker Cutlery and Hardware Company, Inc., owners, Newark, New Jersey. It's also kind of interesting there that they have foreign representatives, someone for Buenos Aires, Melbourne, Australia, Shanghai, and Calcutta, India. Pretty cool. So they're sold all over the world. There's the Valley Forge trademark, the VF inside the circle. And down there, figure 1 is an image of the factory in Newark, New Jersey in 1920. Pretty good sized plant. Also kind of interesting on this page is the image of the Boy Scout knife. So there's an unofficial Boy Scout knife with Valley Forge etched on the blade, and it has a gaslight key and the screwdriver cap lifter, and also the bail is on the forward end, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so by 1921, Boker USA, therefore Valley Forge, moved their manufacturing operations to a new facility in Maplewood, New Jersey. The old facility in Newark continued in operation until about 1924. Then fast forward to 1976, when Cooper Tools acquires J. Weiss & Sons, who had previously acquired Boker USA, and Cooper Tool closes the Maplewood, New Jersey plant. Also, I want to note that the Valley Forge name is still being used on Frost knives. I guess they bought the name on knives imported from China. All right, all of that because I got a Valley Forge Scout knife that I want to show you. And this really is a beautiful knife, and I've been after one of these for a while. They seem to be kind of hard to get. Here you can see this one does read Scout Knife on the banner shield here. That is pinned in place through these bone handles. This brown kind of a Rogers jigging, I believe. You do have lined nickel silver bolsters and a nicely permanently attached bail. This knife does have brass pins and liners, a real thick brass spacer. You can see the back springs there are carbon steel, as are the blade and tools. It's just a really well made knife. Let me go through it with you. The screwdriver cap lifter is large, it's kind of oversized, so this is typical of these earlier Scout knives, the really the older ones. It does have the older style can opener, and you can hear that this knife has great spring tension, great walk and talk, a lot of snap. Here is the punch or awl, and it's completely full. There are no markings on any of these secondary tools, but here's the main blade, and it is a spear point blade, of course, with a crescent nail nick. It is heavily swedged, and I would say it's 95% full. I did sharpen it a little bit. There were some dings in it, and I wanted to clean it up a little bit. I didn't sharpen them all the way out because I didn't want to take away too much material. Again, I just wanted to clean it up a little bit. If this blade had an etch at one time, it's long gone now. Has a nice patina to it though. Here's the tang stamp. It reads Valley Forge in a curved line, Cutlery Co. straight line below it, below that Newark, New Jersey, and below that USA. And on the back side is the Valley Forge trademark that I talked about, the V and the F inside the circle. Now, in dating this knife, all of these tang stamps with the curved Valley Forge, and any time you see this trademark, it's 1916 when Boker adopted that to 1950 when they discontinued it. So that gives you a very broad range there that doesn't really help you narrow down the date. I do know though from the Boker book that this particular type of banner shield was used by Boker from 1925 to 1956. So now we can narrow that range from 1925 to 1950 on this knife. And I just feel like this knife is a pre-World War II knife. It just has that look about it. The style of the tools, the construction of it, the materials, and the quality of the build all remind me very much of a pre-World War II knife. The knife has just got more of a tapered, curved frame. You've got a beefier, heavier screwdriver cap lifter. I'll compare that to a more modern or more recent Boker USA knife here in a minute. But yeah, a couple things. It does have brass. If it were made anywhere from 1942 to 44, that would have been steel because all the brass was being used for the war effort. It does have the old style can opener. Safety can openers came out in 1943 or 1944. I know those weren't all immediately adopted by every knife company, particularly in Europe, but they were adopted pretty quickly. It was adopted pretty quickly here in the US, the safety can opener. This knife is not as old as the one depicted in the 1928 Boker USA catalog that I show you here. It looks very similar. That knife just reads Scout in the badge, not Scout knife, but that doesn't really mean anything because they could have used both of those interchangeably. But you will notice that it does have smooth bolsters, and the screwdriver appears to be chiseled, has a chiseled cut toward the end where this one is just a continuous taper. Also, an interesting thing in that picture is that the awl is turned around. So what I mean by that is the milled side, this side, is pictured toward the inside of the knife when facing it from the mark side. I don't know if that's just for illustration purposes. I think so because it would be really hard to open a awl like that. And so I think what they're really doing there in that catalog is just showing you what the back side of the awl looks like without having to print two pictures. And then finally I have a picture of a very similar knife, a Valley Forge Scout knife. Very similar to this. This is from an online listing. The seller really didn't know the date either, so it doesn't really help me date it by association. But there you can see that knife reads Army knife instead of Scout knife in the badge. It's very similar to this one, except it does have smooth bolsters. I really don't know the date of that knife either, but I seriously doubt it's a World War II, Army knife, because I have a Boker USA knife that I believe is military issue from World War II. It's all steel, and it just has the look and quality of other Army engineer knives from that time. And I want to show you the difference in some of the tools between these two knives. So here's your Valley Forge can opener, and here's the Boker USA, I believe, Army Engineers knife. And you can see that the Valley Forge can opener is more tapered, it's more tumbled or rounded on the edges, it's got a smoother feel to it, and it just looks like a little more finished affair. There are also some pretty marked differences between the screwdriver cap lifters. They're the same length, but you can see that the Valley Forge here on the right is a much broader and bigger, thicker, heavier tool. And also I want to compare this just to a later knife, which is also a Boker USA Scout knife. This one is the John Primble Belknap branded knife. So this was a house brand for a big hardware company at the time. It's a little bit of a later knife because while it does still have the bone handles, it has the safety can opener now up here on the main blade end, and taking its place is a very different long and slender screwdriver cap lifter. Also, this knife does not have the awl anymore. At this point in time, Boker was using a secondary pen blade. But just getting back to the overall build, it may be hard to pick up on camera here, but the Valley Forge knife, which I believe is earlier than this knife in particular, it's just a more of a slender, tapered, rounded knife. I think these Valley Forge Scout knives are a little tougher to get than the Boker USA Scout knives. At least I've had a harder time getting a hold of one. Been looking for one for a while. I was the only bidder on this knife. I was the only person to hit the minimum bid, so I probably overpaid for it. But maybe that was just because other people didn't recognize exactly what it was, that it was a Boker, or they didn't see how it might clean up. I was able to, I think, put a really nice look back to it. So if you're looking for, early Boker knives, Boker USA knives, and you come across a Valley Forge knife, particularly one with the curved tang stamp or the Valley Forge trademark, consider that, because that's a Boker USA knife. Also, if you come across one that is branded John Primble Belknap, and has a star under the model number on the back, that's also a Boker USA knife. So consider picking that up. All right, I hope that's been interesting and informative to you. As always, I appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and have fun collecting.